I can confirm, Madam Chair, that the live stream has now been started.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody and good afternoon to the meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board on Monday the 28th November 2022. So just covering some housekeeping matters to start off with. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent, and I'll do that as we speak. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photography may be made aware. And I think we have one hand raised. Now, in terms of the procedure and etiquette for the meeting, only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. For those people in attendance as virtual participants, can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute. And I do believe I have two members of the committee online. So could I please ask, first of all, Councillor Wilding, if you can hear and be heard, please.
Thank you. Yes, I can hear and see. Thanks.
And I also believe I have Councillor Lester.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Can hear and see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so with those out of the way, I'd like to move to the agenda. Apologies for absence. I believe I have apologies from Councillor Watson, Councillor Howes and Councillor Fagan. Are there any other apologies, Clerk?
None received, Chair.
And do I have any name substitutes?
None.
Thank you. Are there any members that wish to declare interests? Any interests? No. So agenda item 4, moving on to the minutes. I would like to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of October 2022. The clerk hasn't received any amendments, so can I get a raise of hands for approval of the minutes, please? Thank you very much. So moving swiftly on to item number 5, questions from members of the public. Clerk, are there any written questions from members of the public received?
There are no questions for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you. And item number 6, questions from members of the council. Have we received any?
None received.
Thank you. So that moves on to the main substantive item for today, Herefordshire Council's Human Resources and Workforce Strategy, which you should find on pages 15 to 32 of our report pack. This item is to consider the workforce strategy, and we have Councillor Liz Harvey as a cabinet member, and also Tracy Sampson as Director of HR and OD in attendance. I would like to hand over to Tracy Sampson to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take it as read that the report has been read and received by the committee members. And I just want to acknowledge 3 things, if I may, please, Chair. The first is that this is the first time a workforce report has been brought to Scrutiny Management Board, and perhaps because it's the first report is why the brief was so broad. I'm therefore acknowledging that it's recognised that the committee may decide that there are some topics that warrant a deeper dive at a later date. Secondly, I just wanted to acknowledge that recruitment and retention challenge that we face right now is exceptional. It's not unique to Herefordshire Council, but I want to acknowledge that a disproportionate amount of time and resource is being spent on recruitment and retention, and that will continue for the foreseeable future. And the last thing I wanted to acknowledge is that our current and our future staff may be watching this meeting. And I'd like anybody who watches this meeting to leave this meeting knowing that this can be a great place to work. We know there are lots of challenges and we're working really hard to be an even better employer than we already are. But everyone who joins us can expect a warm welcome, and this includes agency staff who are really important to us. The work we do here matters, and you do have a chance to make a difference if you work here. And working here, like in any public sector organisation, can be very challenging, and when it is, we will do our very best to support you. The last thing I wanted to say that is if you do work here, then you'll work with some of the best colleagues you could ever hope for. And I mentioned earlier that recruitment and retention is as challenging as it's ever going to be, and that is my pitch to anybody who would like to work here. I didn't want to miss the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think members also recognise that at the end of the day, the council, we provide services to so many people, and in any service organisation, really, our staff and our workforce have to be our number one asset. And I think the members recognise that our staff are so important, and I think that's why we are, for the first time, looking at this from a scrutiny perspective, because we recognise that it is so important, and we really want Herefordshire Council to be the best place for people to work as well. So thank you very much for that. And as Tracy indicated, this is quite a broad report that we have in our pack. So, and I think I perhaps didn't keep committee to time as well as what I should have in our last meeting. So my proposal is, so we can keep on track today, is we start off with maybe some more strategic matters that you may wish to discuss initially, which encapsulates really paragraphs 4 to 10 in our report pack. And then we spend a small amount of time in turn talking about the workforce strategy, leadership development, then retention, recruitment and retention, learning and development, culture recognition and reward. And we spend a few moments in each of those areas. And then hopefully by doing that, we would have covered off some of the performance reports that support a number of things in those areas. If not, we'll have a small part to discuss the KPIs and the staff feedback, if anyone has further specific questions on that. Is everyone happy with that approach for today? So given that, I would like to open it up to the members in terms of questions that they would like to propose, focusing on the strategy and more strategic elements. So Councillor Summers and then Councillor Stark, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Tracy, I'm going to go right to my pet thing, and that's well-being of staff. I'm still not happy with the process. It's been working at this for quite some time, and I'm hoping that you will be one of the few ones that have listened. Okay. So for starters, the card that's to Orchard. I know it's available, I know it's advertised on the website, etc., but to me that's not good enough. People don't like to advertise that they may have an issue, and they're not going to come and ask for it. These cards should be given to everybody, and all new staff with their pack, and I presume there is a pack when they're hired. Can you tell me if there is?
And do you have any further questions, Councillor Summers? So then perhaps, if we can also, at the end of the day, our role is to hold Cabinet to account. So if you could perhaps, if where possible, forward your questions to Councillor Harvey in the first instance.
Anyway, Tracy, can you answer that question that I put forth, please?
With your permission, Chair. Just to clarify, Councillor, no, we don't issue an induction pack anymore. I'm afraid we're in the realms of electronic packs now, packs of information. But what we do is for every new starter, they are issued an electronic contact card, which automatically goes into their contact details on Outlook. So we have moved away from any kind of paper-based induction materials, and we follow the same methodology for contact details for our counselling service.
Now, the wellbeing card, is that printable can they print it off?
I would have assumed they could print it off if they wish to, but any new starter, if they go into their contact details on Outlook, it is the default contact that we put in there for them ready.
Thank you.
Councillor Stark, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Councillor Harvey. And my question is going to be at a strategic level. The workforce strategy is actually called the Workforce and Organisational Development Strategy. And I think that's quite key in terms of looking at these papers and trying to, I think, broaden the debate we might have today, Chair. Because organisational development is where I want to start in terms of my questions to Councillor Harvey. In paragraph 5 of the opening paper, we talk about the OD function aims to create the best possible working environment for staff to be able to succeed and deliver the council's strategic aims. And I think that's important. I want to look at that link between what we mean by organisational development and meeting our strategic aims. I would also refer to paragraph 15, where quite rightly it talks about the council needing to transform the way that it works. It will require different skill sets of its managers and leaders, particularly again imagined by outcomes and impact within hybrid and teams. And then even in the behaviours we have, Councillor Harvey, we have one that says focusing on outcomes. But I don't see anything in these papers here on organisational structure, because it seems to me that that sets the context by which an organisation can be confident that it will deliver its actual outcomes. That organisational structure sets out clearly the right roles and responsibilities that are needed in order for that organisation to deliver its outcomes. And from those roles and responsibilities, you flow down to obviously individual jobs. And I do know that the strategy does mention briefly towards the end, under resilience, I think, or well-being, about job design. But what concerns me, Councillor Harvey, and this is a question I want to put to you, you have a county plan that talks about environment, talks about economy, talks about community, but we don't have a structure within this council that necessarily mirrors that. The first point I want to ask, do you believe that the organisational structure we have is the most optimum in terms of delivering what you want to deliver through the county plan? That's the first one. And my second one, which is much more important, if there's been work done on organisational structure, which I'm incited on, and I know the Chief Executive looked at the corporate leadership team, but what I see there are still the same commands. I see corporate directors now called for economy and environment, which was economy in place. I see a corporate director for children's services, but we had a director for children's services. And I see a corporate director for adults and wellbeing, but we had that before. So, depending on what your first answer is, Councillor Harvey, the second one is, has there been any work done on organisational structures since you took over and since the Chief Executive was appointed? And is there any papers on that we might look at a future meeting, Chair? Because I don't think we're going to be able to look at that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Stark, for your questions and for the approach that you've taken to thinking about this. I did my MSc in manager and organisation development, so it's of interest to me professionally as well as in my role as a cabinet member. I think we have got a structure which is fairly well aligned to the county plan and the priorities that we've got for delivering. As you've identified, we've got a directorate called Economy and Environment, and those are two of the major strands of our county plan. And community really covers all of the people-based services across adults and children. I think in terms of structuring the organisation in a way which helps our staff to see where the work that they do aligns with the priorities set out in the county plan and the key deliverables that are identified in the annually published delivery plans. I think that the directorate structure is quite well fitted for its purpose. In terms of whether it's an optimum structure or not, it's really more for me about how you work within it, because whatever sort of a structure you have, you've got to be able to feel at home, have the resources around you and the skills and expertise and organizational memory that helps you to do your job and to understand how that job might be changing. But then also, as a council, as our finances have reduced, it's not. There are lots of complaints that we have from members and from members of the public, and probably from our own staff in places where we're accused of being stovepiped, we're accused of being, operating too tightly within those structures. And I think one of the important messages that Paul Walker, as our chief executive, and the leadership team and across cabinet, we're really keen to keep broadcasting out there, is a whole one council approach to undertaking the work that we do. So really encouraging people to work across the internal kind of departmental and organisational boundaries that exist. And I think one of the reasons that I am particularly pleased to have as part of my cabinet portfolio responsibilities the whole corporate services area, which includes human resources, but also finance and contracts and the property team and the project management office, is that I see that as cross-cutting, those services as cross-cutting, more in a matrix way. If you imagine the departments, the directorates as being sort of vertical columns, the corporate services are knitting those columns together and cutting across them, but also integrating information and knowledge across those areas in the way that those professionals work in providing support services into the service areas, but also in terms of integrating knowledge within their professional teams. And legal's a good example of that, where we have specialist legal, where we have specialist lawyers who work to the adults directorate, to the children's directorate, into planning and into the other service areas in economy and environment. But they are managed as a professional team on the corporate services axis by lawyers and by people who know how to manage and develop people with a legal background in order to give them interesting jobs and challenges, and also to make sure that they are meeting the demands and needs of their professional bodies. So I think of the council more as a sort of a fat, thin matrix, where we're sort of fat on the directorate axis in that we've got more staff sitting there. We're thin on the corporate services axis. And those directorates are well aligned to the county plan and our deliverables. So I hope in explaining my way of looking at it, that gives you some sort of feel for how we think strategically about the structure, and it seems to work. But if there are improvements that can be suggested by Scrutiny Management Board, more than happy to look at them.
Councillor Stark, does that address?
Now I've got a couple more follow-ons from that. I still want to get this link back to outcomes, because it said in the paper about organisational development being linked to outcomes. There isn't a KPI on outcomes in the workforce and organisational development strategy. All the KPIs are very internally forecast on attributes and everything else. So I can't see from what you've said whether that structure is delivering the outcomes that you believe it is in terms of the objectives under the county plan. Also, and you know, I have raised before the way that we have reduced the percentage of our funding to economy and environment, which is 2/3 of the county plan in some respects, but it's only got one corporate director, and I'll come back to that. I don't know, Councillor Harvey, if you're aware that under economy and environment headcount, it's been reduced from 574 in 2018 to 290 now. At the same time, community wellbeing has gone up to 406, children and young people have gone up to 365, corporate services gone up from 166 to 266. And this is my point about organisational structure setting the scene for how an organisation works effectively. It seems to me that because you've got these corporate directorates in the way that they are structured, the funding decisions we take as a council is aligned to those corporate directorates. And that is a mistake in my view, because it's clear from these figures that having only one corporate director for 2/3 of the county plan means, in my view, that we are not focusing on fair funding for that particular directorate. And when it comes back to HR, and I will stress this, if you reduce a staff figure by half in that time, then that's going to create stress for our planners, for our environmental health people, for our trading standards people, for everybody else who works in the economy and environment. And I would be worried if I was the executive seeing these figures about what is actually happening with those staff when they see all the other numbers exploding, when they see a huge amount of money going into children and young people. And that is fed through the corporate structure. Because by having that corporate structure, we are aligning our funding to it, and we're missing sight, in my view, of a looming problem here. And I think that is one I would like to raise with you. And not having any KPIs and outcomes, particularly linked to economy and environment, I think that's an issue for you as well, Councillor Harvey. So although you said you think that the structure's working right, I'm not sure that the evidence on the ground actually supports that.
Well, I'm not sure whether you are committing a fundamental mistake by assuming that there needs to be balance between the number of staff in each of the directorates. If you look at the information that we publish to do with our funding, you can see that more than 2/3 of the council's disposable income is going on social care, either for adults or for children. The Economy and Environment Directorate comprises the majority of our non-statutory services, and you're quite right to have identified that that is where a lot of the cuts over the last 10 years have fallen. But that's as a consequence of our funding being reduced by government and legislation by its very nature requiring statutory services to be delivered whatever by the council. So the numbers that you quote in terms of increasing numbers of staff in delivering children's services and delivering adults services is a reflection of the increasing demand that there is for those services out in our community. And the reducing numbers in economy and environment is a function of the reducing funding that is available to us from central government to pay in the revenue funding for the delivery of services that we are not legally obliged to deliver as a council. But it's not all gloom and doom in economy and environment, because of course government is providing sort of one-off funding, mostly capital type funding for one-off type projects, and the Stronger Towns project that was recently given government approval for nearly £25 million worth of investment in projects required to be delivered in the city, is an example of that kind of one-off funding. And those bids are managed out of economy and environment and are in the main delivered out of them. And the increasing headcount that you've seen on the corporate side of things has been reflecting where we've been bringing in professional project managers to try and make sure that projects are delivered to time and to cost for the council from now on, and those staff sit there, but they support and help to deliver services in the directorates. In the way that they work in a cross-cutting fashion. And similarly for the legal team, there's been an increase in the headcount in the legal team, also again to provide dedicated legal support into the service areas. So where you see staff sitting in a structure is not necessarily where they operate all the time, and there is no assumption that each directorate is equally balanced in terms of the number of staff that are needed in order to deliver its services.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Councillor Hutt. We've got a few other questions. I appreciate we've got quite a bit to do. And I think
I did want to come back on the delivery point though, Chair, because we had Cabinet last week with the Q2 delivery report, and that identified that more than 80% of the deliverables are either delivered or on track for delivery according to their planned timescales. So this structure is delivering, and that's across E&E as well as both of the social care directorates. So I think you need to not just look at the staff workforce and organisation development strategy, but you also need to look from an outcomes point of view at what the sum total is of everything that everybody's doing.
Thank you for that point, Councillor Harvey. I'd like to move to Councillor Norman, please.
Hello, is that working? No, it's not red.
No,
It is now. Good. I'm moving on to something slightly different. I don't know whether you wanted to follow up issues already raised before I do, or
if they're related to more strategic issues before we delve into the detail of the other areas of the...
I want to talk about recruitment and retention. Okay. Shall I keep that, or shall I?
Can we keep that for one moment?
Absolutely fine.
If we have, I think Councillor Swinburne might have a more strategic style question.
Well, I think it's just picking up is maybe just a slightly different way of looking at something that Councillor Stark was already picking up, which is something to do with the structures of the council. But looking at the employee survey, and in fact it's quite interesting that's even expressed thus within the survey, that there's a very clear positive feeling around team loyalty, team leadership, that the closeness of those working colleagues, and that feels really good. But there is something happening when the question moves over to the council, in inverted commas, and I'm not clear whether that's referring to the corporate structures of the council, the leadership structures, what we entirely mean by that within this context. But then that there seems to be there's a sense of almost dislocation or distance where the numbers are, even I think there's a question around, let me just find it. Okay, the percentage of staff who feel that the council works as a team, that question. So there's the question's actually put in negative members of staff who do not feel that the council works as a team, ranging as high as 70%. 67%, 60, 67, 70, from 51%. And looking at it positively, it's around 12% think that it does work well in the team. So there's something around that. But it's quite hard to pin down on in looking at that structure. But I think it's really important that we are listening to, paying attention to, and listening to the employee survey and trying to interpret what it is that's telling us. And is that a structural issue in terms of our staff feeling that they're near, that the team in which they work is one thing. However, how it relates to the overall structure of the council is something completely else. And that's sort of how I interpret it. So I'd be interested, Councillor Harvey, in your feelings about that.
Well, it's an interesting area to delve into, and as you say, the information isn't there to be able to understand more deeply what's sitting behind that. Generally speaking, for me, the strong connection and association with, the local team that people have and the place where they fit within the council is a fairly natural, and I'm glad people feel that they are doing good work and that it's valued and that they function as part of an effective team in delivering those services. It would be an uncomfortable place to come and work in the morning if you didn't feel that about the job that you did on a daily basis. Relating to everything that the council does and the council in the generality, in terms of whether it functions as a team, I think it must be a struggle for our staff when there are as many negative comments out there on social media and in the press about the council. And if people know they're doing a good job local to their team, they may struggle to identify with the behemoth that is the council in all of its functions when they see so many critical comments out there and people not really understanding the detail of what they do on a daily basis. I think it would be interesting to delve into that feeling of belonging and how far it stretches a bit more. My instinct says that it will stretch differently in different parts of the organisation, and that some parts are very focused and tight in terms of the work that they do, and others, if you went to the project management office team and asked them about how they felt, because they work with so many different bits of the council, they probably as a team get to have a much broader view of everything that's going on than somebody working in the bowels of the education team or, in a very specific area of adult social care. So
can I just pick up on it sort of just seems to me that, and particularly in the development of any strategy, in a sense includes in the type of human resources, it is the human bit. And sometimes that can be at odds with the strategy bit. Because actually what is human scale, and we have, this is a really much a person-centred organisation, we have an enormous number of interfaces with our residents who are, who may be vulnerable, who may have complex needs, whatever. We have to always keep our focus on the human as being kind of where we operate, and the strategic bit as being some kind of background noise, and that balance is maintained appropriately, so that we don't get a disconnect. So it's actually more or less all feels human. But I think that's probably that's how I would kind of interpret that idea of the team. So the team, if we can enlarge the idea of the team is not literally just the people you're immediately working with, but the council is the team, and then keep corporate structures as a sort of, background noise.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Before I move, I believe Councillor Lester has his hand up. I just wanted to ask a question myself. Paragraphs 8 to 10 talk about the workforce strategy, and having read the workforce strategy, I think on page 15 of it talks about an engagement index, and how will we know when we're being successful? Now, I'm not quite sure. This may be more, because it's a more specific question. It might be more of a question for Tracy than you, Councillor Harvey. But if Councillor Harvey would like to answer it, I can go to you first. But I guess it's understanding. It talks about an engagement index. Do we have? It might be in the papers. I apologise. What is the engagement index, and how successful have we been on this workforce strategy? That's my first question. The second question is, we appreciate that the workforce strategy needs to be revised. So what are you envisaging your key changes that need to be made? So then my, Councillor Harvey, do I refer to you first, or specific question to Tracy?
I think I need to direct you to Tracy in terms of the detail on the engagement index, but I'd appreciate you repeating the paragraph and page number.
Yes, it's not within our pack. So the workforce strategy, the elements that I'm talking about are the generally workforce strategy paragraphs 8 to 10 of the pack, but the workforce strategy itself was not included as in our pack. But the engagement index and how will we know whether it's been successful or not is on page 15 of the workforce strategy.
Okay, sorry, I haven't brought that with me in my brain.
Yes, no problems about that one, Councillor Harvey. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't bring it with my brain, but I did bring it on a piece of paper, luckily. So in the staff survey outcomes, we measure the employee engagement score, and that is a combination of a number of responses. And we have a set number of responses for each survey. We track them collectively, and it will produce us a number. So the current engagement score is 3.56 out of 5, which in itself is a fairly meaningless number unless you're able to track it over time or benchmark it against other organisations. And that's what that number then allows us to do. And what that number shows us is we do benchmark reasonably well with comparable organisations.
And over time, do we have any of that information?
We've substantially changed the survey this time. So I'd like to answer yes, but I think the answer has to be no.
Okay. And so that number that you're talking about is the same as the engagement index?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So the second question I had was, recognising that the workforce strategy does need to be revised, what are you anticipating the key changes to the strategy to include?
There are two biggies for me. The one is the workforce strategy was written before COVID, where pretty much everybody came into their workplace each morning, then went out and did their jobs, or sat at a desk and did their jobs. So we haven't referred to the different way in which we work now, which is considerably more different. We haven't referred to flexible futures. So the whole project about work is what you do, not where you go. And we don't talk about the spirit of Herefordshire. And the spirit of Herefordshire is a phrase you'll start to hear more of, but that's kind of the strapline we're using for our culture change programme. And you won't see any of that in the workforce strategy. I'm sure there's lots more we want to put in there, but it was written pre-COVID.
Okay, and I think as we delve through the different areas, we will probably come on to that. Councillor Lester, before as the last question, before then we move into the detail, if that's okay, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. A feature of the council over the last several years has been the workforce has been joined by interim management, and you know, that has come about for various reasons, because of staff that have left, and the critical need to appoint staff into those positions as soon as possible, and the recruitment process doesn't always allow for swift appointments long term. But the benefit of having interim staff is that it brings new wisdom into the council from other places. But we have seen some interim staff leave quite quickly, and I'm wondering, it'd be interesting to know both Tracy and Councillor Harvey's views on what the positive aspects of interim staff have been, and have there been any negative impacts, given that, you know, the stable workforce or a long-term workforce, full-time workforce is one of those key things that that can build that culture that we want moving forward. So I'd be interested to hear their views. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey first.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lester, for your question. Interims and agency staff are a really important part of our workforce these days, and it's not just for Herefordshire Council, it's organisations generally. And as you identified, you know, an interim can be plugging a gap that you want to fill with a permanent member of staff, but the recruitment process and the search for the right person takes a while, and you bring somebody in with the right skills and expertise to sort of hold the reins while that permanent recruitment process is being undertaken. But also, we have had to undertake a major refresh and change program since 2019 in terms of the work of the council, and also the mix of skills and expertise that has been required in order to take us on that journey, and, you know, help us arrive at the place that we need to be an effective 21st century local authority. And so there are some projects, some things that we've needed to do, which we don't need to recruit full-time on and in the long term into, but we do need somebody to bring their expertise to a very focused piece of work for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. And again, interims are an ideal way of getting those skills and getting that expertise, in the same way that the agency staff are a really important part of the staff mix in our social care teams. So the upside of having interims is that they provide flexibility, they fill a short-term gap, they help hold the team together while long-term recruits are coming forward. And they give us the flexibility to get those skills and expertise for a short period of time that we couldn't necessarily afford to buy long term. Downside, you're losing a bit of organisational memory, in that you've got somebody working with you who isn't going to be there for a long time. And I think it's important under those circumstances to recognise that things like documentation, you know, writing things down, making sure that you record meetings correctly and that decisions that are taken are properly recorded, and the reasons for them and the evidence behind them are properly recorded, so that, because you won't necessarily have access to the information in the 6 inches between that person's ears long term. So it's important to make sure that that information is translated into a form that the organisation can retain.
Well, Councillor Harvey, do we have the right balance though with interims? I mean, looking at paragraph 43 of our report pack, I mean, we're now, for 21-22, spent almost 11 million, which is a 344% increase on 18-19 figures. So have we got the balance right with interims? Because that's only some of the interims. I know I think the interims that come to us through Hoopel, but from reading the paragraph 43, there is further spend when the interims are placed through other specialist recruitment agencies. So do we have the right balance if interim spend has gone up so much?
Well, I mean, you're combining interim and agency staff together. Do you intend to do that in the way that you've asked me that question? Well,
from my perspective, it's not permanent staff, and you know, our workforce strategy, we want our permanent workforce, you know, to be happy and we will perform better at sort of an organisation if we have a greater percentage of permanent workforce, is my understanding. And you're talking about the benefits and disbenefits of interim staff. I mean, the difference between, in my mind, interim, I didn't see a massive difference between interim and agency staff. So maybe that's the first step that perhaps we need to educate the committee on. That's Harvey.
Right, okay.
But 11 million, I mean, in this table, it's saying that in 18-19, we spent maybe 3 million on agency spend, and now we're over 11 million.
Okay, and for the viewing public, where has the greatest increase been in agency staff spend over that time period?
Sorry, are you asking me a question?
Well, you're quoting some of the information from the table.
Yes, the main figure. So we're asking you, Councillor Harvey, if you think that the interim spend is appropriately balanced, given that it's increased so much.
Okay, well, I'll do it then. On the children and young people's line, in 2017-18, there was just over £800,000 being spent on agency staff, and it's now nearly 6 million. And you know, it's been fairly well publicised, documented, discussed, talked about that, you know, we as a council are under extreme pressure to try and recruit permanent social workers into the children's area. I would say that is an area where we do not, the balance that we have between permanent staff and agency staff is not where we would want to be, but it's where we are now, and it's a function of the market in terms of what Herefordshire can offer to qualified and experienced social workers compared to other local authorities and big city authorities. So we can get agency workers, but we can't translate those into permanent workers. So I think the balance is probably wrong in that directorate. It's pretty flat in economy and environment between 2017 and 2021-22. I guess if you take inflation into account, across that time period, it's sort of gone up and down a bit, but it's gone from nearly 560,000 to 725 presently. Corporate services, which is where quite a lot of the costs are being held for the sort of short-term interims who are helping us with a transformation journey, you can see go from a zero agency spend in 2017-18 up to just over 2 million at the moment, and a lot of those interim and agency staff are short-term. They're with us to help us on a transformational journey and won't be with us long-term, so they're being used really strategically and in a targeted way in order to bring the right skills and expertise into the council. And community and wellbeing, there's been almost a doubling in agency staff from just over 1 million in 2017 up to 1.8 million now. And, you know, on that line, I think that probably reflects the increasing demand for services in the adults and communities area. And it may be slightly high, but it's probably reflecting the flex that is needed in the workforce in order to deliver the range of services that come out of that area. Okay,
so in your opinion, it's in some areas such as children and young people, it is a known issue and everyone is aware of that issue. But generally, everywhere else, it is, in your opinion, reasonable.
I would say, looking at the numbers, you know, I haven't got the detail in front of me to go through each individual appointment and see what's happening there. But looking at the numbers and having an overview of the business, I am not surprised by the way the numbers cut out against the business right now.
And I think just referring to some questions that I think Councillor, some of the employment stats in the directorates, I think we saw about 100 personnel increase in economy and environment, or corporate services, in corporate services. And I guess that's then, would it be correct in assuming that majority of that 100 increase would be, I think you referred to it being in project management and legal services, and would that be consuming majority of this 2 million agency spend?
I don't think there's a direct correlation between headcount and spend, because some interims are quite expensive and are with us for a short period of time. Members of staff who may be contractors coming into the project management office to provide additional resource on top of the permanent members of staff that are already employed in there, are really just giving the project management office the flex to be able to deal with a changing quantity of projects that they're having to deliver. There'll be a certain amount of headcount for project managers, which meets the day-to-day run-of-the-mill demand that the council has, but then there are peaks where we have extra projects coming in, or we have big capital programs to deliver. So we flex by bringing in contractors through the project management office to help with that. So those numbers will go up and down.
Okay, so the 100 odd number in the project management team at the moment you're envisaging would probably decrease over time, because you're just dealing with a large number of capital projects and things like that at the moment.
I think it'll naturally go up and down. There'll be a core team of employees of the council, and then there'll be a flex of contractor project managers who come in for shorter periods of time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howie. I think we need to start moving through some more of the detail. So if members would like to, if any members have questions around the leadership development element of the workforce strategy, if they could raise their hands, please. I've got Councillor Swinglehurst first. Please.
Are you coming back to me later?
We'll move on to retention.
That's fine.
After that, yes.
I was just curious, with the Future Leaders programme that we've done with 16 participants, how many of those participants are now in leadership roles? How many of them are still with council but not in a leadership role? How many of them have left council? I don't think Councillor Harvey will know that.
No. Shall we direct
my head? So
Tracy.
to ask Tracy.
Going to struggle slightly. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say they were all in management roles of some sort beforehand, mostly around service manager, heads of service roles. I think almost all of them are still here.
Okay, that's good, because I think we need to take whatever, I know it was very disruptive, that program.
Was.
But it's really important we take whatever the learning is around that and embed it, because that it's so critical that anyone in the staff has a pathway to obviously develop themselves professionally, but also to further their career in order for them to want to remain here. So it's good to know that they're all still here. So that goes to show that something good about that.
Yeah, I think it was a good programme. The timing, we were really unfortunate with the timing. It's definitely something we want to pick up.
Yeah, I mean, if it had a positive impact, even though it was very disruptive, that's very good. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I would like to go back to Councillor Harvey and one or two of the other points she's made, but let's stay with leader and development. Can I just refer to the leavers' feedback, paragraph 50 of the paper, where they do talk about needing to improve in the area of organisational direction, better leadership. I just throw that out. I mean, that's quite an interesting observation the leavers have made. I don't know whether that's reflected among staff generally. It's just something that seems to be staring us in the face in this particular report. Have you anything to say on that, Councillor Harvey?
Councillor Harvey.
Paragraph 50 is
Okay, yes, I'm just reading it. I think those are all valid points. I mean, I'm really glad that leavers have the opportunity to have exit interviews and to reflect on their time with the council. The kind of feedback that people provide at the point where they leave an organisation is really valuable and can be very powerful. You know, I would, all of those comments there are things that I would expect to see as being the kind of comments that people leaving an organisation would make, depending on their reasons for leaving. Any of these could be reasons why somebody felt that they would be better off being somewhere else, or that the next point on their career journey was elsewhere. And I think they're all valid learning points for us as an organisation. It's sort of getting down into the detail underneath those sort of headline sort of areas for improvement, where the real value is to be had.
And I think from a leadership perspective, I think we've seen, you know, through children's services and the detailed analysis that's going on there, that, you know, a lot of comments around cultural change and the need to shift. And I guess it's trying to understand, Councillor Harvey, how you potentially how you're working with the HR and OD team to try and drive, I guess, you know, how do you drive cultural change? It's going to be through your leaders and that leadership program. So, you know, what changes or what focus are you going to be driving to enable that change to occur across the council, which, from what I understand, is not just endemic to children's services.
Okay, well, I know that a lot of work has been going on looking at leadership and the cultural change that's needed in children's particularly, but we take the learning broader than that. And I know that Tracy's been putting a lot of work into providing support to the Children's Directorate while it's been moving through its improvement plan, and also the follow-on from the Ofsted inspection in the summer. I think in terms of making improvements, culture change is the most difficult thing to do, and you really need people who are walking the talk in terms of leadership and team management, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's been important, particularly in children's, to get the right mix of people in those leadership team positions to be able to not only come to join us knowing what a better performing organisation looks like, but also to identify what's, you know, important and special about why we do things the way we do here in Herefordshire, and when to maybe push back on some of the statements that are made about, well, you know, this is how we do it here because that's the Herefordshire way. And maybe, you know, some of the feedback that we've got in recent months, and particularly from following on from Ofsted, is that some of the things that have been the Herefordshire way have not been the right way. and we need to take that tough feedback and recognise it for what it is, and understand where and how some of the things that we do need to change. But culture change only comes from walking the talk and changing those behaviours one person at a time and teams together.
Okay,
It's a long, slow process.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think we have 2 more questions on leadership development before we move on to the next element. So I have Councillor Lester, followed by Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. No. My question about interims was directed to Tracy as well as Councillor Harvey. So I'd be interested to know Tracy's views on the matter. When we look at table 43, just talking about agency staff, these sound high figures, but without knowing what it would cost to have full-time staff instead, it's very difficult to know whether that's a high figure or that's just slightly high or that's incredibly high. So I'd be interesting to know. I know it's perhaps hypothetical some of the time, but it would be interesting to have the figures of what it would have cost had those appointments been full-time. But yes, as I say, I just would like to give the opportunity of Tracy in terms of recruitment and all of the issues and all of the positives, and maybe if there are any negatives about having that flow of work of staff, whether there are comments you'd like to make. Thank you.
And apologies, Councillor Lester, for cutting your question short. So Tracy, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. I agree with Councillor Harvey when she summarised that there are occasions where we need interim workers. That's normally to fill some sort of gap that we've got in short-term expertise or for a short-term project. In those instances, absolutely desirable that we have an interim. Where we're using agency workers to fill permanent posts, I think in that situation we would always prefer a permanent worker. Having said that, I just don't want to understate how valuable it is that we can recruit agency workers, and sometimes we can't. The agency worker market is incredibly competitive. But for me, there are a few negatives. And the one is where we have interim or agency workers where there's high turnover. That's really unsettling for both staff and for the communities we serve. So that is not ideal. It also takes up valuable resource because we induct every agency and interim worker in the same way we would do if they were a permanent worker, because we want everyone to have the same experience. So that takes up a lot of time and resource. And also, I think I can't avoid the cost issue. And broadly speaking, for every £1 we put in an agency worker's pocket, we put 20 pence into the pocket of a very expensive agency. I'd rather we didn't do that.
Thank you. Before I cut your question short for the 3rd time, Councillor Lester, does that address your question?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Stark.
Yes, I'm going to go on about leadership as well from the staff survey results in section 3, but I just want to make a point about interims. I mean, we only got the planning backlog down because of interims. We're only dealing with children's services because of interims. I mean, interims can be a way of masking organisational structure deficiencies or some sort of deficiency that we've not looked at. Now, I understand we can't have a debate today about structure, and I don't want to go back to it, but I just want to leave that thought. The more you employ interims, the more it might be masking issues within the organisation that are not being addressed. But if I can take you to section 3, and this is about the staff survey, Councillor Harvey, not just about leavers, and what they thought about the council culture. And they do talk about the main emerging theme is that more is required to articulate the council's overall vision and purpose. Can I ask, therefore, what sort of engagement did we have with staff on the county plan? What did we do to articulate the county plan to those that work for us? Because it seems to me to be an issue here. And it's back to Councillor Swinglass's point about working for a specific team but not seeing yourself as working for the council. there seems to be a gap there, and if it's not structural, and I accept that's your view at the moment, I would like that looked at, then it must be because information isn't being disseminated in a way that allows staff to understand what the organisational vision or purpose is. So what did you do or not do in terms of trying to articulate the county plan to staff across the council?
Well, from memory, I think the county plan was discussed with staff, was briefed to them, was related to their particular areas of service. More particularly when it's come to doing the delivery plans, the deliverables have come about through a sort of a circular dialogue between directors and their teams in terms of what the things are that we need to do in order to achieve the objectives of the county plan, and identifying what the key steps in doing that are and how they can then be articulated as deliverables that are capable of being recognised as having been done, having been delivered, and put down as significant milestones on the journey towards meeting the objectives of the county plan. So that was sort of an iterative piece of work that took quite a while to agree in terms of what the right things were, but my understanding was that would have been in conjunction with discussions with teams about what they're doing and how that fits in.
So are you disappointed with the reaction from the staff survey then on organisational vision and purpose?
Sorry, which bit are you referring to there?
Section 3 in Appendix 2. Sorry. Section 3, Appendix 2. This was
working at the council and the council culture.
Yes, Section 3 of Appendix 2.
Page 31.
Sorry, yeah,
Page 31.
Yeah, I would say I probably am a little bit disappointed, but our staff have been really excelling themselves in terms of the workload that they've been carrying, through COVID and out the other end of it. I don't think there's a bit of the council that hasn't been affected either directly or indirectly by that, either in terms of how people work or the services that they've supported or been moved to support. So it's been quite an unsettling couple of 3 years, and I wouldn't blame people for having struggled to be able to position what they're doing in a broader landscape of what the council's doing more widely. And if you only see a little bit of what's going on, sometimes it's difficult to understand how it makes sense in terms of a bigger picture. So I can understand how it's come about. It is a little disappointing, and ideally we would want a lot more of our staff to understand that bigger picture and to feel invested in it and part of it. And I think that's something that we'll have to work on as part of how we come out the other side of COVID and keep on going.
I think I've got probably a follow-up question to Tracy on that one in terms of, look, we've got, almost upwards of 18% turnover, 554 line vacancies or numbers of jobs recruited to. How is this, the council's vision and objectives, how is that, and we've got a lot of new staff and a lot of turnover, so they may not have been there when the county plan and the delivery plan were initially put in motion. So how are they becoming aware of it, and that message of them, all working to these greater objectives?
We cover the council's vision and values and our behaviours at induction, and all new starters attend induction. I think it's really clear that there's more work to do about how we embed that after day one, because on day one you get an awful lot of information.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot to do about making sure that we've embedded that message. And we're working really hard now with a cohort of managers. We call them our leadership team, and they are approximately 60 of our top people managers. And the chief exec has started to bring them together on a 6-weekly basis, because they are going to be our key people to help us translate all our messages into reality for the people who work here. And it's that really overused analogy of the golden thread, isn't it? But it's really important that people can see that what they do and what difference does it make to the council overall. And I agree with Councillor Harvey. I think it's a disappointing outcome, but what's good about it is it's really clear. People have told us what they think, which means we can do something about it. And there are some aspects of the staff survey where you're left wondering, what does that really mean? This isn't one of those. We know what that means. So for me, that's great, because we can fix it.
Thank you. Given the time, I think I would like to, Councillor Swinglehurst, before then we move on to Councillor.
This is just a kind of a quick comment really about how do we focus on what works and what feels good, and where do we want to be, because reading to people, so I was put in mind of once coming into the atrium after Storm Dennis, and we had I don't know how many members of our staff out there in their high-vis jackets with brooms and buckets under the inspiring leadership and command of Steve Vickers. We're all going to go out and just help people. And the feeling was immense. It was inspiring. It was brilliant. And it's kind of that. If I were to say, what is the spirit of Herefordshire? What is this? It's not a logo. It's not a catchphrase. It's not a glib thing. It's not a website. It's that. And that's what we want to try to remember, as it were.
Thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Right, I think we spent a good amount of time on leadership, because I think that's really important. I think that another really important area is recruitment and retention. So in terms of the workforce strategy achievements, I'd like to open the floor to Councillor Norman first.
Thank you. Yes, looking at this, it really does overlap with a lot of what we've been talking about already, in my view. One of the things I think is important to consider is, when we're recruiting and retaining, who we're retaining. One of the things that came up in our discussion last week was the fact that 75% of the workforce are women. Is that a relevant factor when we look at who we're losing, who we're gaining? Is there a clear picture of, is it mainly women or men leaving? I think that's very important. And that very much links with what I think is extremely important for us to bear in mind is the work-life balance. And that's come up, and it's one of the issues I think was raised as being not right for everybody, and one of the reasons why people leave. I think I'm right in saying that our the age range, the bigger age range is of people who have children still at home. So it seems to me extremely important that we're thinking about parenting and how people square parenting with their work. And for me, that's absolutely crucial. It's a really, really important part of how we are good employers, how we keep people happy and well balanced. Because if they're not happy at home and how things are working out at home and with their families, they're not going to be happy at work. It seems pretty self-evident, really. So I'm quite interested in how we look at all that. And of course, along with that, it's not just people being reasonably happy in their work, managing to sort of fit it with home responsibilities and children at school and all that. And of course, that became incredibly fraught over COVID when children were being sent home, and there was this real difficult balance, even more so than there usually is. But it's also to do with progression. People, and it's primarily women who are the carers, not entirely, so I would say parents, not just women. But the opportunities for progression, for getting on in your job, for promotion and all that sort of thing. How important is that element within what we're discussing here? To me, it seems as if it should be very, very important indeed. So I'm really throwing that out there and asking, because it's not mentioned. There isn't a reference specifically, other than the cold figure, 75% or whatever it is. It doesn't seem to be referenced anywhere unless I've missed a substantially important part of this whole thing. But to me, that's pretty key. And again, when we are offering people, all the things we want to offer our potentially new recruits, we need to bring in that whole picture of how they will be managing and how we can help and support them to do that. Clearly, the job mustn't suffer, but it's making sure that both of those things are taken as being important. And again, in retaining.
So I think quite specific. So I think if I can perhaps ask Tracy if you could respond to some of those points by Councillor Norman, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the really brutal answer is if we don't offer our workforce a good work-life balance, then another employer will. So that's the really brutal message. The key for me in a good work-life balance is flexible futures. And COVID hasn't done us many favours, but it has rapidly shifted the way in which we work, which does give most people who work for us the opportunity to manage their day differently, which is fantastic. And I just wanted to draw your attention to one stat in the staff survey, which 84% said that they felt they were trusted to do their job. And I think that one is so important when most work now is undertaken not in the eyesight of your manager, where previously it would have been. So that's a huge shift. And we have done a lot of work with managers about managing by outcomes, but that's a really important shift that people know they can get the job done without having someone sat in front of them. The other thing I think I'd like to mention is this isn't just about children and families. Until 12 months ago, I would have said that we have more workers aged over 65 than we do under 25. And that's a real pinch point where a lot of people start having additional caring responsibilities. So don't make any assumptions about anyone's caring responsibilities. Assume everybody wants to have a work-life balance. But I can now announce for the first time we do have more workers under the age of 25 than we do over 65, which for us is fantastic. Largely, I think, thank you to our apprenticeship scheme.
Great.
Can I, that's very encouraging to hear. Two things. One is, I don't think it's overtly referred to, and I'd really like to see that we recognise this. I mean, I think you're right, it's self-evident really, to some extent. The fact that there is this disquiet among a significant but smaller number means we shouldn't ignore it. But, and the other thing is progression, if you could address that one as well. Is that an issue, women taking time off, mainly women, sometimes men? How are we addressing that? Oh, and sorry, the other one is the whole business of pay balance. Is that a factor? Is that being referenced significantly, would you say? And there's other things that go with that. I mean, do we flag ourselves up as a fair, what's the term? Can't remember the term now. That's what I'm looking for. The
gender pay gap, is it?
The foundation, the Living Wage Foundation. I believe we meet that criteria. Do we flag it up? Do we celebrate it? Do we say, look, we're a living wage foundation employer? Our ratio between the highest paid and the lowest is actually not bad. It's 8 or 9 differential, whatever we call it. Those are things which to me seem to be very important and should be attractive to our potential employees rather. And I think we could be mentioning that and sort of referencing it more or at all. Don't think we do it at all, actually.
Thanks, Councillor. Well, I think I could do a thesis on pretty much every one of those topics you've just mentioned. We've strayed straight into the pay policy statement, which is right up Councillor Harvey Street. If I just tackle a couple of them, we're a disability confident employer. We've signed the White Ribbon Pledge. There are lots of things that we are doing as an organisation that we didn't used to do to try and make sure that we are really inclusive and we flag to people that it's okay to be you if you work here. I think that's our message. It's okay to be you, and we will support you being you. I have very little in the way of statistics at my fingertips to tell me what happens to somebody's career based on their diversity statistics. So I don't have that kind of information. So I cannot tell you if we have a glass ceiling, for instance, for certain characteristics. We do report the gender pay gap on an annual basis, and Councillor Harvey will be waving at me to let me know that the gender pay gap has actually worsened recently. Our position has worsened, and we'll be reporting again in January, and we'll want to know whether any of the actions that we've put in place have been successful or not. So this is an area that we haven't covered in this report in any depth whatsoever, and it might be something that you want to look at in future.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd certainly like to hear more about it in the future, clearly not this particular moment, and sharing it and celebrating where it's something worth, promoting and making available to possible employees. Thank you.
And I think our councillor is first.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on on this theme. It's very striking. We've got 75.6% of women working, 90.2% part-time. I mean, that's extraordinary. That's almost everyone. And yes, indeed, the gender pay gap has opened from 8.2% to 13.9%, which is not an insubstantial increase. So I would be interested in what are we going to do about that, because clearly we don't want to be going in that direction. And the other thing, I would like to make sure that in the strategy and in our thinking, that we have very clear, practical, actual things, rather than sort of saying we support women and women. Actually, how we support, and the white ribbon is fantastic, but probably childcare would be even more fantastic, or something practical, and it's I've often thought, if we actually had a facility, or we encourage somebody to put a facility, very close to here, then that would be so helpful, because somebody at the childcare facility, because then whoever it is coming, it's not going to have to go somewhere else and then come here. They can come here and bring the child and put the child in the care facility, whatever, and maybe different ages as well, because it's not necessarily just nursery care. There's school holidays to consider. We really have to put our employees first, and so many of those employees are women, and will have caring responsibilities one way or the other. That I would like to know that or maybe we just ask them specifically, what can we do to help you with this? You're absolutely right. The flexible futures, the changes, this huge acceleration as a result of COVID, that's opening up enormous possibilities. But there's always the kind of this residue of needing to be physically here when you're trying to also be somewhere else doing something else. Women are always multitasking, aren't we? So I would want to see. I'm not expect hearing now, but a real sense of how we're addressing the gender pay gap and meeting those needs specifically.
That could potentially be a recommendation coming towards the end.
Yeah.
If you perhaps wanted to have a think about that. I think I have Councillor Stark, and then we'll move on to the next element.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
In the interest of
Yes, Tracy, we did really have a debate on this split between male and female employees in the council. And really I want to ask the question, why? Why is the council made up of 75% females and 25% males? It's a question that really is being asked because it doesn't reflect the underlying population. And I wonder whether there's anything in that might affect our recruitment and retention strategy, for example, partly from what you're going on about, Councillor Swindle, it's not. Or is it a factor that our paying conditions as a leavers say are not very good? So I don't know. I just don't know what the questions or answers are. Career progressions leavers talking about are not very good either. So I'm not actually wanting a debate today, Chair, but I just think it's a question that should be asked. Why do we have a makeup in the council of 75% women and 25% men, which obviously doesn't reflect the working population in Hertfordshire, I would think, and whether we can learn anything from that?
If Councillor Harvey or Tracy would like to comment on that. Yeah, Tracy, yes.
Without having any stats in front of me, I think I'd just like to highlight that most of those traditionally male occupations have been contracted out of the council. For instance, maintenance work, refuse collection, cleaning, maintenance work mostly have been contracted out. So I think that would be an important factor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, do I have any more questions from committee on recruitment and retention before we touch on the next element of the workforce strategy? So learning and development is the next, and I'd probably like to start at paragraph 29. A recent employee survey was used and a number of developments were identified. The need to revise the learning and development offer. So I guess what are these key learnings? And also I think in our workforce strategy, we talked about subject matter experts and supporting subject matter experts in the development of training. So there was no mention of an achievement around that, so it was just cross-referencing the work strategy. So what are the key learnings? How are we going to be changing learning and development offer? And how are we supporting the subject matter experts in the development of training? Who do Councillor Harvey first, and then if Tracy has anything further. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, could you repeat that question? I had my internet drop out.
Oh, yes, no problem. So paragraph 29 of the report, we're looking at learning and development within a workforce strategy. It was identified in the staff survey that there was a need to revise the learning and development offer. So what are the key learnings? What are the key elements that perhaps we're going to be focusing on to improve the learning and development for our staff?
Well, I think I'm probably going to have to pass that one to Tracy, because I think it will very much depend on the detail underneath that staff survey response, and it will be different in different parts of the council.
Thank you. Tracy.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. For me, this is quite a simple one, in that previously, in the last 2 or 3 years, we haven't had much of a learning and development offer at all. And I think it's fair to say that in 2011, the corporate learning and development offer was completely removed, but for 3 or 4 mandatory training modules. So everything we do from a learning perspective is new and fantastic and really well received. This is the first organisation I've worked in where there isn't a suite of compulsory courses that you have to go on as a manager. So, for instance, I mean, we wonder why sometimes we have procurement problems and there isn't a mandatory procurement course. So from those really functional training programmes, and that's what it's referring to when it talks about supporting subject matter experts to deliver training. You probably don't want me delivering procurement training, you probably want a procurement expert, but we'll help them with their training skills. So from those really quite functional and really important training courses we're putting in place, to more leadership and development training that people are calling out for, and for instance, coaching training. So everything that we put on now is absolutely lapped up by the workforce. People can't get enough of our training offer. It's still really small, but it's in development.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. And one of the other things I was interested to understand, I can see referral to performance development plans and things like that for staff. Is there 360-degree feedback? So do we actually get staff to feed up performance on their managers, or is it just in one direction?
It's on the list.
It's on the list. Great. So that's something, for example, we might see come out in the new strategy. Fabulous. Okay. Do we have any further questions on learning and development from members? Councillor Swinglehurst?
Yeah, no, it's really good to hear that you're making a differentiation between learning practical, technical and development, which is different again. Because I think there's sort of something around that, particularly around development, that we have to set aside time. Even though I know that there's a capacity issue throughout the council, it's about acknowledging the importance of that and setting aside time and making sure that that's a regular thing. And I think it would be great if we were kind of quite creative and open-minded about what that means. So for instance, I was, but for instance, I went to Jamie's Farm, which is a fantastic setup, works with kids, and and it's about reconnecting to why it is you do the job you do. Why does it make sense? Why, what inspired you in the first place to reignite passion? Because sometimes it's just about day-to-day dealing with stuff. And I think if I was to say, what would I want that factor X in training or development to be, it's about that, it's about reconnecting to the passion.
I completely agree. There's also something about how we sell our training too. So for instance, if we put a training course on called stress management, hardly anybody turns up. If we call it bounce back ability, we fill the room. And I'd encourage everyone to go on bounce back ability. It's a fantastic course.
Great, thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. The last section of the workforce strategy achievements, paragraph 30 to 35, was on cultural recognition and reward. So do any members have any questions on this area? Councillor Stark.
Yes. For once, I'm going to actually bring in our residents. That's why we're here. We haven't actually even mentioned them today, which is amazing. I think that's our fault. In paragraph 30, Chair, it talks about the council's employer brand. It doesn't talk about the council's brand and what that means for our residents. And I think that's really important. I mean, our residents depend on this county for much of their services in terms of their daily lives. And I don't know whether, Tracy, whether we're going to be looking at the council's brand, whether we're going to be going out to residents to ask what they think of us and what they think we're there for and what we do, because I think we might get some interesting answers, and it might actually be a good learning exercise for us. So while I'm not against you talking about the council's employer brand, I'm not against that. I think there's a piece of work above that, which is to do with the council's brand and to do with what the residents understand we are here for. And that can feed back, Chair, into really good learning for us as to whether we really are on the same wavelength as our residents. Because at the end of the day, we're only here because of the tax our residents pay in one shape or another, whether it's central taxation or local taxation. So yes, if we're going to do this exercise, Chair, I think we need to look at the council's brand as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. Any other comments? I guess I've got one question. Paragraph 33, we talk about there had been a focus in 22 to widen the employee benefits offer, and the council has at elements 8F. I guess my question, and I think this might be more for you, Tracy, is have these actually been taken up? We've offered them, but have employees taken up the offer, and are they having the desired impact?
Thank you for the question. Yes, so for instance, if we talk about perks at work, I mean, some of these things are so minor, but this is it. In order to change the culture of an organisation and create a sense of belonging, you have to do a lot of little things. Yeah. And things like gems at work and perks at work are, for instance, just little things where we might have biscuits on the cart. We know that's effective because you put 200 packs of biscuits on the cart and then half an hour later they've all gone. You know, people are engaging with it and then they're giving us feedback. Our new benefits provider, I don't have any stats in front of me, but that has been really well supported by the workforce. We've got a new annual leave purchase scheme, which of course is one of those key things that you need to help people manage their lives. That window for purchasing annual leave for next year is currently open, so I don't have any statistics on that right now. But I do know that the annual leave purchase scheme that we put in place, just so people could buy annual leave this Christmas if they wanted, it was taken up by about 40 staff, which is a small number, but you know, for that small number of staff, they needed those extra days, which is great. I can bring more stats back next time when we know whether this current leave window has been well received or not. Things like coffee connections, we've done that, I think we're on our second cycle. That's had a relatively low take up, but it will take a while for people to trust the scheme. And just briefly, coffee connections is, it's an attempt to replace the conversations that you might have with somebody you don't ordinarily work with, who you might bump into in the canteen, but you don't because you're working from home. So if you volunteer to be part of Coffee Connections, you're just randomly assigned a buddy and you meet up and have a coffee. It's that simple. I've done it, and now I recognise people in the canteen who I wouldn't have known before. So just lots of little simple things. What impact does it have? I don't think I'll be able to answer that until we get the next set of staff survey outcomes, because these are lots of programmes that we haven't had in place for very long. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. I've got a head of OD who's got a head full of these ideas.
Brilliant. Looking forward to the new workforce strategy then. Yeah. I think I have Councillor Swinglehurst and then Councillor Summers. Thank you.
That's really good news that you have a head of OD like that. That's really brilliant. So I look forward to seeing those. I think that there's an essential. You're right. It's in detailed. It's in precise, actual, practical, useful. Because what that says is that we are thinking about you. We care about you. We're thinking about you. It doesn't matter if it's a pack of biscuits or somewhere to park or a light in the car park or whatever it is. we are thinking about you and your well-being. And the more you message that, and the more the numbers of ways you can find to do that, gives you, or everyone who works here, the sense that that we want them to be here and we value them and we don't take them for granted. And I think that's, so we're really looking forward to seeing the full range of the offer coming forward. Now here's a thought, when we're talking about the brands, that council start talking about this idea of brand, one thing that's always occurred to me to be an opportunity that we might explore usefully, because we are not unique in Herefordshire struggling to recruit because of rurality and all that. Everyone thinks about Hertfordshire and all that. There are other companies, and indeed some of the carers, companies with carers and just companies, I don't know, all the time, companies, everybody's having the same difficulty. So what we maybe need to do is think slightly bigger, and rather than Brown Herefordshire Council, Brown Herefordshire, and do a cross-promotional advertising campaign where in fact we're advertising what a fabulous place it is to live and work, because it is, it's brilliant, you know? It's the most brilliant place to be. So so I don't know, that would be a useful thing, I think, because it would support our drives of our economy and us to get more people, you know, to come here. So instead of being stuck on a tube train in the rush hour, you're here in this beautiful place with great schools and all the wonder that we have in Herefordshire. And we've never tried that, and I think it would be worth having that conversation. But yeah, it's in the detail. Looking after your staff, it's in the detail. You know, making sure that they have access to coffee and biscuits and whatever. So I look forward to seeing them. Thank you.
Councillor Summers.
First of all, Tracy, my apologies for asking my well-being question to you rather than Councillor Harvey. But I could ask Councillor Harvey. We have 1,200 employees, or maybe have less now. We did have over 7,000 sick days. Do you know how much those sick days cost the council? No, I'm asking Councillor Harvey now.
No, sorry, Councillor Summers, that's not my area of detailed expertise. I think there is a table in one of the in the appendix which identifies the amount of sick leave being taken in different parts of the council, and you can see a variation in terms of the absence in different directorates, and that's a function of the kind of work that they undertake. But no, I haven't got a monetary value on it. Sorry.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. We have about, right now, I think there's 35% of employees are off thanks to stress. So I think it's something we really need to be looking at. Anyway, enough of that, Mike. It's mental health stuff. I know people don't like to hear it. I go back a lot of years, and I remember when I was a kid in Worcester, in Hallow, going to a Christmas party held by my father's company, and it's still, at my age today, it's still a memory. We have more women than men. Most of those women will probably have kids. Have we ever thought of having a Christmas party with their kids and doing it properly? Because you get more, that will be all over actually probably the only place in the UK right now that's doing it, but it's something that I think we need to be looking at. That's a well-being thing too, so that's all. Thanks for, you can answer the question though, Tracy, have you ever
No, I think that might be Councillor Harvey. I think we'll direct that one too. I think it's more Councillor Harvey, Christmas party.
Well, whatever you say, Chair, I know I don't get it right. Thank you. I'm getting tired of it all.
Christmas party.
Yeah.
No, I'm not aware that that's been something that's been that's been considered. I would have to take that away and make some inquiries.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. But I think, Councillor Summers, your points around well-being are very, very important. And I think, I would like to maybe drill down a little bit more on your stress figure. So I think paragraph 5 of Appendix 1, page 27, the council monitors reasons for absence in the last 12 months. The most common reasons across the council is stress, 35%. and sort of just looking at the absence figures, I guess I just wanted to drill down into that in a little bit more detail, and whether, coupled with, I guess, turnover and vacancies, I had a couple of questions at paragraph 7. What live vacancies, number of jobs recruited to means? Because I guess in the 21-22 period, we had 265 new starters, 238 leavers, a turnover rate of 17.56, which is significantly higher than pre-COVID, and then live vacancies 554. And if I take the number of people employed by the council at December was 1,357. 554 represents about 41% of that workforce, and whether is that. So I guess I would like to understand that 554 figure in more detail, and whether that's telling me that we've got quite a lot of vacancies, people are having to cover for other people, they're having to work up, hence stress. It's just trying to triangulate that data, and whether, I guess, given it's a more technical question on what that stat actually means, perhaps Tracy, if you're able to kick us off, if you've got any further information, that would be great.
Thank you, Chair. So live vacancies means the number of times, it's a clumsy phrase, so I do apologise, it's the number of times we've attempted to fill a job that year. So that's how many times a manager has put a job through the sausage machine, if you like. And why that's a useful stat, you can see how many times we've attempted to fill a job this year compared with the previous years. That doesn't mean to say we've had 554 vacancies, because it might be that we've attempted to fill a job several times and been unsuccessful. I can speak from experience. I've tried to recruit to an HR advisor vacancy 4 times, so that will show there 4 times. But the reason it's recorded is that takes time and energy.
So, I guess looking at the turnover rates, we almost getting up to 18%. Is there a link? Do we have any more information about 35% of absence being stress related? Do we have any more information behind that? And do we have action plans to try and address that?
We our data here isn't very how can I put this, useful. I'll be really straight with you, in that our categories for recording absence are quite clunky and general. If I drill underneath that figure, it actually, stress is the overarching label, but it actually covers all sorts of other psychological illnesses. And for instance, we do actually capture data based on whether someone self-reports as being work-related stress or non-work-related stress. So we can give some more discrete information than is already there. That's a really broad general label. We report the absence figures in 2 committees. We report them at the Health and Safety Committee, which meets quarterly, and with the unions at the Joint Partnership Forum. And both of those committees have commissioned additional work into our absence rates, because we go into greater detail and we look at the data by directorate. So for instance, I can tell you, and we can see on here that some of our highest absence rates are actually in the Community Wellbeing Directorate rather than in Children's, where you might expect. And that's really important, because then we can target the work where it's needed. I think I might have also referred to in the report that despite all the work we've done in community wellbeing, we have not managed to shift those figures, and we have done extensive work.
Okay, and I'm also conscious that Councillor Summers also is really keen on the mental wellbeing cards, and you're at the beginning of the meeting talking about how it's all gone electronic. From a mental health perspective, do you think that is working, having it all electronic, or have we got the right balance for the communication of our mental and well-being to try and address some of these underlying trends? I'm always willing to hear alternative suggestions, but I think we broadcast and let people know about the wellbeing offer in a number of ways, and we do it repeatedly. So we let people know at induction, we send them the contact details electronically, we print a number of cards which we leave around the building.
We regularly refer to it in the Chief Exec's bulletin on a Friday. Whenever we have a particular incident or a particular situation that we're dealing with, we remind people of the contact details. And these are services that people can go and access themselves without going through their manager.
Okay, thank you. I think I have Councillor Starr.
Yes, it's really going back to what Councillor Summers is trying to tease out here, Tracy. I'd like to refer to section 6 of the staff survey response on page 32, where we benchmark the overall well-being for the council 23.24 against, is that an average 23.61? Because if it is, we're actually below the average, Chair, for well-being. Now, if I go back to my point about economy and environment, half the staff that was there in 2018, now Councillor Harvey can talk about balanced workforce against all the directors, and maybe I'm wrong to think there should be a balance between them, but the fact is we have reduced the staff in economy and environment by half, and I doubt whether we reduced the demands on their time. So I'd like to ask you, Tracy, are you happy with that outcome? Because it seems to me it goes back to what Councillor Summers was saying, that the indications there that our staff are under stress, and they're only coping because of their loyalty and their commitment, and they're the ones always being asked to go beyond what they're expected to go beyond. And if they didn't, then I'm pretty certain then you start getting the problems with greater absence, greater turnover, and the other issues that we've been talking about today. So I'd like a full explanation about what those figures actually mean, because I think Councillor Summers has been trying to tease that out this afternoon as well.
Well, this is again, in a similar way to the staff engagement score. This is a benchmark, and this is the first time that we've calculated this score from the staff survey. And it uses a number of the questions that we asked to come up with a score. There's a formula behind it, and it's one of those things which allows us to benchmark against other organisations. And the reason we like to do that is I can sit and tell you that we've got great health, but we've got nothing to score that against. So numbers are really useful. I can't tell you whether that number is good for us or not, because it's the first time we've ever used it. I would like that number to be higher, but I accept it, and I accept it because of the year that we've had. I think that is a reasonable score based on how challenging it has been to work here in the last year. I wouldn't mind though if I could just mention the headcount issue in economy and environment. I just would like to flag that most of the corporate services used to sit within economy and environment, and that's why the headcount has reduced so significantly. I, for instance, used to sit, and my team used to sit under economy and environment. So I don't think that we have seen a massive reduction in headcount of people who work in that directorate. We've just restructured the council differently.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, we did all that.
Tracy. Councillor Summers.
Okay, can we go back to the previous, I think up to 2019, the figures were 1,200 basically employees with 7,400 sick days due to stress, the figures that I got a few years ago when I was asking for it. We're not, it's plateau, it seems to be plateauing, it's not changing, it's not, I know we've been through COVID, but these figures were before COVID. I would expect them to go higher now, so if they're staying at 35%, I'm quite happy actually, but it's still not very good. So can you go back on those figures, and can you get any information? That was before COVID basically. Can you get anything out of those figures that are already there? The 1,200 and 7,400, it was over a certain amount of time, but even so, it's a lot of stress days. Anyway, if we can go there, I'd like to get something on. I've been trying to get information on that. I'm not the greatest brain in the world, but I think we need to sort those figures out because they're very high. And all I know is when I'm talking to companies that use me, my concern is how much it's costing them in pounds, which is in the billions if you go worldwide. So that's why I'm interested in what it costs the council. But it's costing council not only in money, it's costing council in PR work, public relations, and all of that stuff, which starts to get very expensive. So I think if we start, I know we get into the well-being issue, we might help the hiring part of it. Anyway, that's all I'm chasing. Thank you.
Tracy?
I completely agree with you with the cost issue. I think I mentioned in the report somewhere that we're working with the performance team and we will have a new suite of reports available from HR. From an absence perspective, there are two things I've asked for. One is cost, and the other thing is I'd like to report on the number of staff who have no sick days at all. Those are two things that are completely missing in our reports. But any further suggestions that the committee have, now's the right time, because we're starting to build those reports and historical data is available. So if the committee were interested in historical absence data, that's there.
I see something I was reading, I'm not sure I read, in Japan, for non-smokers, get those, for the days that they get extra days per year off for holidays because they are non-smokers. So they, you know, but it's something on the same idea that if you can reward those people that are not taking sick days for whatever reason, stress is one of those things that, and that's why it is a well-being issue, because stress can be used rather also. It's not just happens to you, it can also be used. So it is a bit of an issue. But if it's being used, it's generally because the employee is not happy anyway, so they're using the stress as an excuse. So anyway, enough from me, but I just think it would make a difference to hiring. It's all part and parcel. I still maintain the card should be handed out because I know I won't go and ask for a card. I think it needs to be handed to me in my hot little hands. Anyway, enough from me. Thanks, Tracy.
And I've got a couple of more councillors with questions, but just before we move on, touching on your point about KPIs, Tracy, I know Scrutiny Management Board, this is new. We haven't looked at HR strategy workforce planning before. The other thing that we haven't looked at really for a very long time is budgets, and we've been looking back at budget performance. And in the back of budget performance is a set of performance indicators on delivery around the delivery plan. And there are some HR KPIs in that, not very many. I see that the percentage of permanent workforce has actually even been removed. It wasn't in Q2 or Q1, but it was in Q4 last year. So I've got a question around the KPIs, and in terms of do we have the right KPIs? Because I think Scrutiny Management Board have potentially questioned the KPIs in the back of that pack and whether a lot of them are still under development. So where are you at in terms of developing that KPI suite for essentially the health of the organisation around HR?
Yeah, I agree and accept we have very few KPIs, and to produce them is actually quite difficult. Don't for 1 minute think this is hitting a button. But we are, I understand, I think we're about 4 weeks away from having a first set of data. So the work is well underway.
And where will that data go to? Is that just a CLT? Will some of that be captured in the budget performance reports? Do we know, as members, I guess, as ordinary members, not part of cabinet, would we get any visibility to those?
Well, people are hungry for data, so the moment I start producing it, I know that I'm just going to generate more requests for it. But my initial plan is to produce, I need CLT to have an annual and a quarterly report. My cabinet member would like an annual and quarterly report. And then from there, let's see where it goes. But for instance, we don't give directors a regular report about the state of their workforce. So the moment I start to produce it, the list is going to be enormous. But I expect that, and that's good because people are interested.
Now, I'm just conscious of time. I think we have, I think we've asked a lot of questions, and I think we've covered most of the areas of the workforce strategy. So I'd just like to open up to members for perhaps last overarching questions that they might have, and then we can wrap up for the day. Councillor Stark.
Yes, Tracy, I take your point about the confusion over the figures between corporate services and economy and environment, and I don't really know from them whether the expansion in corporate services has caused a reduction in economy and environment or whether it has genuinely fallen. But this well-being index that you've given us, can we have that by directorate? Because I think that would actually give us a clue, Chair, as to where people are feeling that their health and well-being is lowest. or not? Because we've only got it as a whole, and I'm not sure whether from these figures I can be certain that people in the economy environment are under more stress. So if you could do that, I think that would be helpful for
It's
the chair.
It's in staff surveys. There's the SWE and WBS wellbeing score.
Is it split between directorates, is it?
Which is the Short Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale.
Is it split between?
Yeah.
It is split between.
It's done by directorate, is it? So we can get that information.
So, yeah.
So I'd like to see it.
It is
Thank
quite
you.
consistent though, there was no.
All right, I just want to see it just in case, okay. Right.
Councillor Norman.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was just following Tracy's point about feed in any, thoughts about collecting this information. And really, it's information about health and well-being, about absences, about leavers. I think it would be very helpful to know, things like is proportion of men and women, ages possibly. I think they're all relevant factors. I don't know how complex that makes it, but I certainly think that adds to the picture, and I would suggest that.
Thank you. Councillor Swinglehurst.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's useful triangulation between the survey, the employee survey, to the extent that the exit interviews, but less so, because I think it's quite, and well-being, because I think even though that it's got the kind of headline figures, but if you're looking at low scores for the 20% feels the council values my opinion, or listens to me, or the council's open and transparent, then this is likely to accrue into stress, isn't it? Really, so it's not enough to say, oh, we've got to. It's like, what is it really that might be causing it, and address that. So you're upstreaming the whole problem. The other thing is the strategy says there'll be robust wellbeing support. What, again, because I like to think, I'm a kind of a concrete thinker, what's that going to entail? What's it going to actually do? Sounds great, what's it going to be? And not to forget actually that desk-based working is really unhealthy. It's terrible for your back, for your hip, for your shoulder, for your neck, for everything. It's all musculoskeletal stress points of and staring at a screen for hours at a time. So we mustn't forget the whole person when we talk about well-being, and what we might do in terms of practical things, making sure that meetings don't go on for 3 hours with nobody standing up and walking around. It's kind of basic stuff that we have to make that a non-negotiable, that everyone has the opportunity in the day to get out, walk around, get some fresh air, whatever.
Great, thank you, Councillor Swinglehurst. Do I have any more comments from the Zoom or the floor?
I could.
Yeah.
I could add to Alyssa's. Sorry, Alyssa, she's not councillor. I think if you read the instructions for office workers, part of it has to do with screens, etc., and that the whole thing is to get up out of your chair and walk around the table and sit back down again. It's good for the body and good for the mind. So I think I'm not sure if it's in the handbook or anything, but I think it's something we should be pushing, because everybody needs it. And I know when I'm writing, I haven't written for a long time, I really get sore shoulders. So thank you.
Councillor Lester.
Yes, thank you. I think the most important thing to be a good employer is that you allow your employees to just do the job they need to do, and rather than tell them to do this and tell them to do that and sit this way and walk around, just leave people to do whatever it is they want to do that's most effective for them to get their job done. But the emphasis, I think, should be on, the employer saying, what do you need to do your job properly? Make it an open question to them, rather than say, we're going to do this for you, we're going to do that for you. And so everybody's needs are different, and everybody's lifestyles are different nowadays, and everybody has a flexible arrangement. So the question, I think, should be more open-ended, in that, this is the job that we need you to do. This is the things that we need achieving. How can we best help you to achieve those tasks and those goals? And I think if it's addressed in that way, it's a much better way of working with the workforce rather than to say, well, this is the situation, we want you to do this, we want you to do that, you know, and I think that really is the best and modern approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. I probably have one last question in terms of this new workforce strategy. What timelines are we potentially working towards? So if sorry, Councillor Wilding, I see you've got your hand up, but if we come up with any recommendations today, and what I'm going to be suggesting is perhaps we articulate some of those recommendations, but I think we've had some really interesting and important discussions that perhaps need to be captured more, so it wouldn't necessarily be a recommendation, but I think would be good to accompany the recommendations. So what I'd be suggesting is that we, which we are trying to follow in other scrutiny committees, is that we develop a report from today, which would include, would encapsulate any recommendations that we come up with, but also any other items to note, which may not be strong enough to form a recommendation. So they can all still go to Cabinet in a report, they can all be recorded and put out there for the members of the public to see, and something that we can track progress to. So that's something that I'd perhaps be suggesting. So we wouldn't necessarily be recommending to Cabinet today, but we would form a report which we'd then sign off in our next meeting, which is not too far away. So one of those things that I'd just be interested in to understand is the timeline. There are a number of concerns in the data that has come to us and coming out of the staff survey. You're assuring us that you are going to be, you've listened to those, and you've understood that information coming from staff, and as a result you're going to be making changes to your workforce strategy. So when would we expect to get to see, say, the next draft, so we can then see how things are moving forward?
Thank you. I don't want to make up a timeline on the hoof, but it's not due for renewal until 2024, and we're not going to wait till 2024, because otherwise I apologise for it. And I said, here's our strategy, but oh, I'm sorry, it's out of date. It was out of date as soon as we wrote it. So we plan to introduce the new one next year, so broadly over the next 12 months. It won't take us that long, but we can work to, if this committee wants to contribute to it, we can work towards your timetable. There isn't a particular timetable I'm working to yet.
Okay. Great, thank you. So if we finish up with Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank everyone for bringing up various questions. I've been sitting listening, and most of the things I was thinking as I was listening, somebody's asked, so that's why I haven't bothered to put my hand up before. I just wanted to say one word: exercise. Really, I always find if I've been for my morning walk, I can always attack the day with more vigour and more interest. And so if there's anything we can do to provide ways for our staff to exercise for free, then I think that would be a great way of, because it's good for mental well-being and all sorts of things, so helps to blow the cobwebs away. So try and bring that in. Maybe we've already got places people can go and stand on a treadmill or something, but that would be my thing: exercise. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Wilding. So bringing this subject to a close then, I have no specific recommendations at the moment from the floor, but I have noted a number of things down, and the clerk might be able to add to that. But some of the things I think that we've talked about is the linking of the activities within the work plan to organisational outcomes, strategies to address the fact that 75% of our workforce are women, of which 91% of them I think are part-time. So elements you'd like to see perhaps further strategies to address that. We touched on branding in recruitment, a Christmas party, all important Christmas party. Also, we talked about the KPIs and the veracity of those. Does anyone out of the, I don't know if the clerk has any more points, but out of those elements, would any members like to formulate any recommendations or propose any recommendations or items to note? Councillor Andrews.
Oh, I've got a non-speaker on item works now.
Just speak up loudly.
I'll just speak loudly as normal then. What I would say is, whilst you were reluctant to give a timeline, I'm going to ask you for one. Because when you say 2023, that's giving you like 13 months now. So you're either going to hit the timeline and say it's going to be in 13 months' time, or you'll either be on time or in front or behind it, as opposed to sort of, well, I said 2013, and that's like too generous for me. I think we deserve to have something that's closer, that you say, I will deliver it by September, and then we can say, well done, you've got really hard to bring it forward, or what made you be late for it? What did you encounter? What stopped you being successful? And I'd rather see Herefordshire Council ask our officers to do that type of work than give you a really generous, open-ended 2023, and you were late, it was 2024, and we're like, oh well, never mind. I want you to be punchy with an ambitious timeline that says you will deliver something that will come in draft form and then be created by councillors and officers, which just then makes a definite document that you can say, that's what I've made in my time here. So I'm going to ask you not to just give us a 2023 date, but you give something that's more constructive of that, please.
Thank you, councillor. I don't do late. So
I'm not early yet, my dear, so.
It will be on time. Okay, if you wanted to absolute nail a date, let's go for September then.
Good, I'll take it.
Done.
Councillor Stark.
I think it's a recommendation around organisational vision and purpose. I say that because both the staff survey and the leavers feedback touched upon that both. I don't want to start talking about culture in that respect, because that's not definite enough. But I do think that the council does need to look at that again and how it conveys that to staff. And we did understand there was a lot of work going on about obviously conveying the county plan and objectives to staff, but it doesn't seem to have got through to them in that respect from the feedback we've got. So I think as a committee, we should ask for that to be looked at again.
Do you have some specific words, Councillor Stark?
Well, that the executive should look again at whether the executive purpose and vision is being adequately disseminated to all staff in the council.
Okay, so this is
Well, it would be within the report, you ask for
whether the staff
recommendations.
whether the staff are understanding the executive outcome, they're essentially the county plan and deliverables.
Yeah. I mean, you could expand on that, but I'm just trying to capture the essence of it for our report. We don't need to sign that off today.
No, we don't need to sign it off
No,
today.
but as long as we get it as a point, okay.
And in terms of your point of linking activities to organisational outcomes, I thought it was very helpful where Councillor Harvey, for example, said, well, yes, we have a lot of, we have over 100 staff working in our project management office, but we've now a percentage on time, which we will probably see when we look at Q2 budget in January, and but we can see that by taking some workforce actions, it's resulted in a particular outcome, and we can see that trajectory to a certain point. And I think one of the comments that a number of people were making is that we've got loads of actions coming out of all these activities listed in our covering report, but what does that mean for the organisation? It's very inward focused and not outward focused. So whether there was anything there as well that you wanted to make as a recommendation, Councillor Stark.
Well, the KPIs are short on outcomes from the impact of the workforce strategy on those outcomes. So I think a simple recommendation to ask for some KPIs to be developed that links the impact of the workforce strategy on the outcomes that we're trying to deliver. I understand that Councillor Harvey said that 80% of the delivery plan has been delivered. I suspect a lot of that's through interims. It's not just through permanent staff, and who knows whether those deliverables actually represent the county plan as a whole. I just don't know. But I do think that we are short on KPIs and outcomes in respect of the workforce and organisational development strategy. And I think there should be KPIs linking that work in terms of what outcomes that we're getting for that. Because at the end of the day, we can be focusing on HR processes internally, and we can be developing staff, but we might not actually be getting the outcomes that we want from that.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Okay, so that's 2 recommendations, and I think there was a recommendation around the strategies to address our workforce in terms of the proportion of women.
Yes.
We'd like to see more strategies within the with the next iteration of the strategy. Councillor Summers.
We haven't really discussed it, but hiring policy is a bit of a concern for me. We seem to be 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Every time we turn around, we're talking to a new officer, or we're not talking, we're talking to a new officer. So I think there needs to be something there that we look at hiring policy and the communications when they've been hired, because we don't often know who it is until we go looking for something. At least that's what I find. I'm not sure who else has that issue. And we've hired some pretty big money, and then we've lost them in a short span of time for whatever reasons, I don't know. But I think hiring policy needs to be looked at. That's just my feeling.
So in terms of that, is that looking at skills gaps and vacancies and doing that mapping?
I'm not sure. Are we doing the footwork before we hire those people is what I'm saying. We may be, but are we doing sufficient that we're getting the right people? Because every time, it takes about 6 months for anybody new to catch up with what's been gone in the past. And we seem to be spending a lot of time in those 6 months catching up. And that's what I'm saying. So I'm not sure how you want to word it.
Okay, so your issues are around the quality of the individual.
Quality of the
that
individual
is
and
being recruited.
yeah. And also, of course, if that new employee in management position that affects us as councillors, if we have a communication right from the start, would it be easier for them and easier for us? So I think there's some work lost in between that. And
I'm not quite sure if we've really fully discussed that.
We haven't.
So I'm not quite sure if Tracy, do you like to respond?
Please, thank you. That's one of the statistics I've asked for in the new report. I'd like to know the number of permanent appointments that we've made who leave within the first 12 months. And for the reasons you've outlined, it's really expensive and time consuming. And if somebody leaves within the first 12 months, we've either missold the job, we've appointed the wrong person. Now, there are going to be some occasions where somebody gets moved out of the area and there's nothing they can do about that, but we can exclude those. So we have no visibility of that stat, and I'd like to see it, because I think it's a really important point.
Okay, so perhaps we can capture that under the
hiring policy. I'm not sure if you can do it under hiring policy. That seems to be a broad picture, but I think it might cover it.
Okay. Any other points, Councillor Stark?
Yes, sorry to come back. We had this debate around belonging and where do the staff belong? Do they belong to the team or do they belong to the wider culture? That's something I touched upon, something Councillor Swinger has touched upon. And I do think there's a key issue there when you look at some of the flavour of the feedback in terms of silos and maybe not getting the information they need. And I think we should be asking as a committee that what should be done to investigate whether we are actually selling the council as a whole to all our staff.
To the brand.
I mean that's just a broad recommendation. I think we need to work it up. But I do think there's work to be done. It's also a question about leadership, as you said, Councillor Swingers, as well, about driving whatever that vision purpose is through the organisation. Because we've got a lot of specialist staff and teams in this organisation who can get very insular if we're not careful. I'm a planner, I'm not working for the council, for example, or I'm a social worker, I'm not necessarily working for the planner. I'm not saying they say that, but there's that danger that they become part of a little cohort within the council, but not necessarily working with the rest of the council. So I just feel that that's something we did touch upon. We need to have a recommendation on that's looked at. It may be a non-issue, I don't know, but I don't think we got an answer today, did we, Councillor Swinburne, from our debate, did we?
No. But perhaps something that we would like to see worked upon in the new
Yeah.
workforce strategy.
Yeah,
And
to
articulate it
articulate it. I mean, I think
more
it's actually not a straightforward question, because it might be that there are strengths to having that
Yeah.
close team feeling, and who cares whether it's related to some corporate strategy? I mean, it's, so there's a philosophical debate around that. It's not necessarily, it doesn't go without saying that it all has to.
Well, that may be one of the answers you come out with, that the nature of local government, nature of the council
Yeah,
is,
it needs considering.
but then you still have to somehow
At some layer it does, at
layer
some point.
have that link
there's
with the
some
fact
point
that we
in
are Herefordshire Council.
in the structure where that connection, that synaptic leap has to be made.
Yeah.
But where is that?
But we shouldn't have to answer that to committee, that's something that needs to be looked at. And you're quite right, it may not lead to anything tangible, but it's something we could at least ask for. I don't know what you think
It's
about
about
that,
investment,
Tracy.
isn't it? About feeling invested.
Tracy's nodding as well, so
It's
yeah.
feeling invested, isn't it?
Yeah,
Having
just
said
have a
that.
look at it and see.
We must be able to have both, mustn't we? We must be part of the team.
Okay.
You need both part of the
Need
council
both.
as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Sum up.
Councillor Summers,
That's
please.
me, right. It's just a follow-up on that. One of the best meetings I've been to in a long time was a planning type meeting at Kindle Centre, and the reason it was so good, it involved planning, councillors and health. It was on the health and how health affects planning. You were there. I thought it was one of the best meetings I've been to, and the reason being, there was an interaction.
Cross-fertilisation.
There was a lot of interaction, which was great, to me anyway. And I think that's something we probably need to look at in the future when we have these meetings, is bring those separate bodies together and put them together in groups, otherwise they're gonna stay in their own little thing. But in this, they were kind of separated and they all joined in. Anyway, it was phenomenal. So I think we should be looking at that. Anyway, thank you.
I think what I'll do now is just refer to Michael, if possible, to see if was there anything else or any other points that you think that we've raised, or if you can summarise where we've now got to, so we can close and vote on this item.
Thank you, Chair. I think, obviously, the points have been summarised quite nicely here, but just to follow up some of the key points I've noted, which I think you want noted for the record to take forward further afterwards. There was, following up on the discussions you've just had, there was about further work to enhance or to ensure that Herefordshire Council priorities and values are communicated clearly to staff, further to activities during new staff induction, making it clear also how what they do matters and makes a difference to delivery of the council's priorities to local residents. Interrelated to that the council brand, not just the employer brand, be further enhanced and communicated to staff for staff recruitment. And it was also discussed in the debate about a campaign to promote Herefordshire and Herefordshire Council as a great place to live and work. There was obviously some discussion, as you've said, Chair, about ensuring that the council has the most appropriate and effective key performance indicators for oversight of HR workforce development. And also that there are appropriate facilities to support female employers in the workplace. There was also in conjunction, sorry, if I just finish this there, so in conjunction with the points raised around linking to council priorities within the workforce strategy and organisational development, there was earlier a point around structure. I didn't know if Councillor Stark, that was important because there's a matter about the organisational staff structure how that links to priorities, key competencies, services, and organisational outcomes.
I mean, I'd just like to ask the committee what they thought about that, because Councillor Harvey said that she felt that the organisational structure did actually reflect the county plan and did actually help in terms of delivery. Now, I'm not sure I'm convinced about that, because obviously we'd have to look at the evidence. But if the rest of the committee wanted that to be a broad recommendation, then I'd be more than happy to say, yes, let's do it. But I don't know what the rest of the committee thinks about it, because we did have that debate with Councillor Harvey, where I don't think we got underneath whether there was an issue there or not. What does the rest of the
Would you
committee
like
think?
us to consider a recommendation around that? Does anyone have any feedback, comments?
No.
Okay.
Are you happy with the structure then?
I don't think I'm picking up completely what you're trying to describe, to be honest.
And I don't think he was here at the time.
Yeah.
Because I think
You went near the time there.
so we let you off on that one.
Sorry.
You're right.
Well, given that we're going to encapsulate this into a report, I would suggest that we draft up a report and we circulate it, we get everyone's feedback and we bring it back to the next meeting. And then if you don't, and it gives us time to sit back and we've discussed a lot of information today and reflect on potentially the recommendations that we would like to make. And then if we need to have that further debate, perhaps we can try and encapsulate that in the report. Councillor Norman, do you have?
Well, it's just really to slightly enlarge on it's not just female, issues. It's reflecting the workforce, of course, which apparently is primarily or largely women, but it's also the family needs vis-a-vis that, it's that balance. It's ensuring that we are taking account of that background where many people are coming from. It does tend to be women who are the carers, but not exclusively. And that is part of what we're looking at and how we're, working in the best interest of our employees and the council and what they are able to deliver. Really, I don't want it to be just narrowly women, if you like. It is that bigger thing, although it is primarily women.
And the way that we can encapsulate your point, Councillor Stark, is that perhaps it needs to have further consideration. We're not necessarily making a decision today, and nor are we in the position to make a decision where we think it's right or wrong, but we're just challenging, and we put that challenge perhaps to the executive. So we can maybe think of a way how we can draft that.
And we don't have any evidence from other authorities how they structure themselves, to be honest. I don't know how this is done normally.
I think the clerk's just raised it. I think we've encapsulated a number of points which we can put into the report. There was just one element that we did spend quite a bit of time on, which was around agency staff and the escalation of spend. And I wasn't quite sure whether anybody wanted to make sure that we raised a point in our report around that.
That would be a good thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I think we've summarised and reflected on some of the key points that we've made. Yes.
Just remember, I've secured a date for a timeline here. Sorry about that.
Yes. Yes. And the secured date
in blood.
The 1st of September.
September. We'll put September. Right. So can I get a raise of hands if everyone is content with the items that we've identified and the fact that we'll put it into a report to then come to our next committee for sign-off? Can I see those in the room are happy with that? Those are great. Thank you very much. And I would like to also thank Tracy and also Councillor Harvey for attending, and it did take quite a bit of time, but it was far quicker than our last meeting, so thank you very much. Thank you very much. So just to finish off, I'd lost my agenda. We have, the next item is the work programme. No work programme was published with today's agenda. So I'd just like to raise 3 quick points to note and recommend the changes to the work programme. The second, we did have a meeting on the 2nd of December, which has now, I'm proposing to delay until the 9th of January. At which point we will review treasury management strategy and also the Q2 budget results. I would also like to recommend that on the 17th we have an additional meeting which will then review the 23-24 budget proposals. And we were due to review people in January, but with that amount of work, I don't think we can achieve people as well. So I'd be proposing that people is an important topic that I think we still need to look at. So I propose we move that to March. So if everyone is happy with those changes, can I please see a change, show of hands?
Will the 17th of January be all day?
No, but I don't believe it will be. And so the date of the next meeting will be Monday the 9th at 10 a.m.
And we have on the 2nd, we have the training.
We had the treasury training on the 1st, on Thursday the 1st, yes.
Thank you.
And if everyone is content with that, we will close the meeting.
Delighted, yeah.
And finish the live stream, please.